Good morning. I'd like to call the Door County Board of Supervisors to order on Tuesday, January 23rd at approximately 10 a.m. Would you please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Bob, can you check your tablet? It says you're not in.
President Fisher is connecting.
Mr. Fisher, is your tablet working? You're good?
Okay, we're good to go.
Yeah. So we have,
Okay, so what do we got?
You got 19 present, 2 excused.
Okay, so we have 19 present and 2 excused.
I can vote for it if you want me to.
Presentation of the agenda. We have a motion and a second by voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Correspondence. Any correspondence to note? None. Public comment. Ken?
Okay, first of all, let's just double check the room. I know we have individuals that are presenting or speaking on the agenda, so there's no one in the public here. So that's our first priority. But if not, I'll go then to those online. For those online, I will please raise your hand and then I will give you the floor and you have 3 minutes to speak. We ask that you please give your name and address. So the first one that has their name up is Christine Reed. I'll move you up in just 1 second. Christine, if you could unmute yourself and just give your name and address, so you have 3 minutes.
Christine Reed, 597 Sleepy Hollow Drive. I'd like to talk about public communications.
Christine, if you're speaking, we do not hear you. Could you just check your connection?
This shows that I am unmuted and my connection is fine.
One moment, Christine, we're checking to see if there's an issue on our side. We're not getting any sound from. Okay, try one more time.
I would put a message in the chat box to let you know. Okay.
Sorry about that.
However, the chat box is disabled, so I'm not able to do that.
Well, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Christine Reed, 597 Sleepy Hollow Drive, Forestville. I'd like to talk about communications with the public, transparency. There evidently is a major glitch in communications with the public. On December 3rd, I sent an email to Tim Kazmierzak and Jill Lau. I copied Corporation Counsel and I copied the entire board. And it was an open records request. It was a request for information, something that I'm studying up on. And I was given the Office of Open Government Guide, where it says that there should be a response as soon as practicable without delay. DOJ policy is that 10 working days generally is a reasonable amount of time. Requests for public records should be given high priority. I waited for 3 weeks and did not get a response. So I asked a legal assistant, what do you do when you don't get a response to an email with an open records request? And she said, send a second request. So on December 20th, I sent a second request and all of the same recipients, I should go back to say, on the first request, in addition to CCing Corp Counsel and the entire board, I copied the board of Friends of the Forestville Dam, the members that are board of the on the Friends board. So I sent the second request on December 20th, and Christmas came and went, and New Year's came and went. And on January 2nd, I received an email from Tim Kazmierzak saying, your email just showed up in my inbox today. And I talked to Jill Lau, and hers also just showed up today. So that is basically a full month after it was sent. And so I asked for an explanation, and Corp Counsel, although I had gotten an out of office reply from him saying that he was out, he did respond saying that county's email appears to be working fine, so the problem must be on my end and that I must have sent the email in properly. So I got in touch with the other recipients. All of them received the email on the date that I sent it. The only ones that did not receive my messages were county. So the problem is not on my end. And I would like an explanation for how that can happen. And I'm very concerned that when I try to communicate with people at the county, that my email is not showing up in their inboxes. Or they certainly can at least say that it is not showing up because this precedent has been set. And
But your 3 minutes is up. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? That's Jill's working on it. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? And for the third time, is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay.
Is there any supervisor's response? Approval of the minutes of December 19th, 2023 County Board meeting.
I'm stuck.
Okay.
Yep.
Somebody care to make a motion? We have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments, corrections, grammatical errors, or other remarks you made about the minutes? If not, by voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. County Administrator, monthly report.
Sure, I'll just be brief on this one, but if you had a chance to review it, you'll notice that we've updated all of the projects starting off the new year. Again, what I do is I put down anything that's considered an operational or special project. The only thing that's active at this moment yet is still the Miller Arts Center agreement. And I have the update on that in terms of where we are in terms of progress. So that's a carryover from last year. And we're hoping to have some of that work done still with that one in the first quarter is my goal. In terms of the capital projects, what I usually do is I go off our capital, our CIP was adopted in the budget. Now I add those in as formal projects. More towards the top, and that there were some projects that are, I guess, carryovers or ones that are remaining from last year. They're still on the list and they're still being tracked. But again, those are all have been updated and included in your packet. And that's it.
Any questions for Ken? Okay. Pending business and updates. Resolution 2024-01 in memoriam of Charles Gully. Mr. Fisher.
Chairman, like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 2024-01 in memoriam for Charles R. Gully.
We have a motion, a second. A voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Go ahead, Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whereas Charles Gully passed away on December 24th, 2023, and whereas Supervisor Gully was duly elected to the Door County Board of Supervisors in April 1984 and served through 1988. He was elected in April 1992 and served through 1997. Supervisor Gully was again elected in April 2004 and served through 2007, serving for a total of 15 years on the county board. And whereas from 1984 to 1988, Supervisor Gully represented Supervisory District 5, including the City of Sturgeon Bay, Wards 9, 17, and 18. For the remainder of his tenure, Supervisor Gully represented Supervisory District 2, including the towns of Brussels, Ward 2, Town of Forestville, Ward 2, and Village of Forestville. And whereas Supervisor Gully served on several committees during his tenure, including Airport and Parks, Board of Health, Emergency Services, Ethics, Highway, Finance, Property, Unit on Aging, Fair Park Board, Ad hoc Building and Law Enforcement, Judiciary. And whereas prior to his county board service, Charles Gully also worked for the Door County Sheriff's Department for 33 years. Now therefore be it resolved that the Door County Board of Supervisors assembled in regular session this 23rd day of January 2024 extend our sincere sympathy to the family of Charles Gully with this acknowledgement of his dedication and service to the citizens of the County of Door.
Thank you, Ken. Does anybody care to make any additional comments? Dave?
In 1992, and that's when Chuck Gully came on representing the other part of Brussels and the Forestville area. I just pointed out to Dave the good-looking picture out there from then, and District 1, 2, and 3 were sitting up in the front corner, and Mr. Gully was seated next to me along with Mike Johnson. It was always a pleasure working with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Resolution 2024-02, County Snowmobile Trail Aid for the 2024 to 2025 snow season. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that we adopt resolution number 2024-02, County Snowmobile Trail Aid 2024 to 2025 snow season.
Motion the second. Any questions or explanation? None? Are you ready? Go to the voter board. That's passed by majority vote of 19 yes, 0 no, and 2 absent. Thank you. Resolution 2024-03, approval of Wisconsin DNR grant for lake monitoring and protective network and CBCW. Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 2024-03, the approval of Wisconsin DNR grant for lake monitoring and protection network, CBCW. It's pretty straightforward. It's just the dollars are down on lines 21 through 25. If anybody needs further clarification, Greg is in the back here and could answer any and all questions, I'm sure.
Okay. Any questions, or Greg, do you feel you want to explain anything? Please.
You good?
Come
Greg,
up,
Greg.
come up to the microphone.
Why don't you
please.
come up to the front, because that way it's on camera too, if you could.
Right.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, you're good. Hi, everybody. I'm Brooke Dreschick. I went to college at UW River Falls for conservation and environmental planning. Throughout my education and afterwards, I have worked in Colorado, I worked in Utah, and then I worked Western Wisconsin, and now I'm making my way back home, being closer to my family, and I have 9 nieces and nephews, so it's nice to be back home. And I've been doing restoration work for the past 5 years, so plants are my favorite thing, and being able to work with interns. I've been training staff for the last 4 or 5 years. Working with college students is, I think, one of the highlights and is a way to inspire me every year. I love it. So, yeah.
Good. Thank you. Welcome.
Oh, to the next one. Yeah. Yeah.
Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to welcome you aboard, and I really feel it's an important position that we have within our land conservation department. The Stormwater Office, is, I know years back, this was sort of a emerging thing, but I really feel it's important to have somebody on board that's focused on invasive species. We live on a peninsula that is, many areas of our peninsula are recognized as globally significant habitat. I think we don't emphasize that enough. And these areas are really fragile and really special, and we need to do the best we can to protect them, and having someone to spearhead those efforts is really important. So this is a good thing that we do for the county.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, thanks. Ready to go to voter board? Has passed a majority vote of 19 yes, 0 no, and 2 absent. Thank you. Resolution 2024-04, approval of the EPA grant Lake Restoration Initiative Wisconsin DNR grant for European frogbit. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 2024-04, the approval of the EPA grant Lake Restoration Initiative Wisconsin DNR EPA Great Lake Restoration Initiative Wisconsin DNR grant for European frogbit in the amount of $9,250.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, we'll go to the voter board. This passed by majority vote of 19 yes, 0 no, and 2 absent. Thank you. Resolution 2024-05, Technology Services Department transfer of non-budgeted funds for tower generator repairs. Dave?
2405, the Technology Services Department transfer of non-budgeted funds. The resolution approves the transfer of up to $20,000 from the contingency expense account to deal with the problems that were found with the generators at the 2 sites, that being the Justice Center and the southwest location down in the town of Union.
A motion, a second. Any questions? We'll go to the voter board. Passed by a vote of 19 yes, 0 no, and 2 absent, and that did require 2/3 vote, which of course we achieved. Thank you. Ordinances, none. Special reports. Ken?
Sure. So today we're doing a special presentation on our study that we've done with our partnership with GZA. So if you'd be willing to come up in front.
Information. We'll pass it.
Yep. Let me just get the presentation. You can do the tap, or I can kind of follow along pretty good, but I'll advance it for you.
Perfect. I'll do a little tap. Ready? Well, hello, everyone. My name is Cheryl Stevenson, and I've been a hydrogeologist with GZA for 5.5 years. I've had the pleasure to manage this project, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our progress with you here today. So I'll start the presentation by briefly reminding you of the geology of Door County and how it pertains to the purpose of this study. I'll discuss some of our project implementation. I'll let you know some of the sampling results. I'll discuss next steps, and then I'll have some time at the end for questions. So as I'm sure you're all aware, Door County sits on a thin layer of superficial glacial deposits that directly overlie the Niagara and Dolostone bedrock. This bedrock also serves as the aquifer that provides most of Door County residents with their drinking water. There's numerous fractures in the upper reaches of the bedrock aquifer that act as conduits directly from the surface into the underlying aquifer below. And so any surface activities that are located in areas of thin topsoil and dense fracture zones do have the potential to impact the aquifer below. As you can see on the map on the right, this is a groundwater contamination susceptibility map. The topsoil is much thinner in the northern Door County, and so it is more susceptible to groundwater contamination, shown by the red and orange colors. These surface deposits do thicken as you move toward the southeast, and so the groundwater is less susceptible to contamination in these areas. And so because of the geology, there has been a history of groundwater impacts recorded in Door County, and this has encouraged numerous groundwater quality studies, most recently noted by UW-Oshkosh and their efforts. But this is the first time that we're looking at emerging contaminants in private wells in Door County. And like the name suggests, these contaminants are emerging, and so they're not regularly monitored. There's a lack of defined or published groundwater quality standards, but there are known or suspected impacts, adverse impacts to human health. And so the first task of our project was to drum up as much excitement and knowledge about this project as possible, to encourage as many people to sign up as possible to be part of this study. The more volunteers we had, the better selection of wells we had, and the better we could tailor it to meet our needs. So the first thing that we done was produce a informational flyer that kind of give an introduction to the project, why we're doing it, who we're doing it through, what we're looking for, the importance of it, and then on the back it had a question and answer sheet for anyone who had questions. And we distributed this to as many avenues as possible to reach the public. We issued it to 22 town boards. We sent 500 letters directly to residents, and then we also utilized the Door County website to get it out there. We also had we were published in the Peninsula Pulse. We targeted some Facebook groups with a lot of followings, and then we had a radio interview in the latter half of August with WDOR. And each of these public outreach avenues encourage people to sign up to our online portal or to reach out to us directly with questions, or if they want to sign up with us for questions. And so our public outreach resulted in about 173 volunteers by mid-September. You can see the volunteers are located in these black squares, so we have pretty good representation across the entirety of the county, and the municipality representation is shown in the table too. Yep.
In the Egg Harbor, do you have any of those Egg Harbor?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm not entirely familiar with the geography here, but I can.
That's fine, thank you.
Oh, that's what I'm
And so when we felt like we had sufficient wells to select from, we began our well selection process. And this was an important part of the project because it allowed us to tailor the project to meet our needs. It allowed us to make sure that we were sampling wells that were representative of the target aquifer, which is that shallow Niagara and Dolostone. There is a few select wells that are completed below in the sandstone aquifer. And to do this well selection process, we utilized a GIS platform that allowed us to look at numerous data sets in one location. And so we were able to look at the volunteers' well location in relation to surrounding land use, topography, regional groundwater flow, proximity to potential source areas such as landfills, orchards, former orchard mixing sites. And we also looked at locations relative to sites that have been open or closed with the DNR for a reported spill or a reported release of hazardous substance to the environment. I'm bad at my time.
What's the difference between the purple and the black triangle?
The purple are chosen and the black, this is actually like an older figure, but going forward, the black were the volunteer signups that weren't selected and purple are selected. We also utilize the well construction reports that you can find on the WDNR website. These provide us with valuable information such as how much surface cover is on top of the bedrock. In this case, we have about 7 feet. We can look at how deep the well is. We can also look at calculating some specific capacity values from the pumping tests that are recorded on these well logs. And this allows us to see if maybe we're in an area of high specific capacity, which is an indication that we may be near some fracture zones. So this is a schematic of the volunteers. I won't go through this in much detail, but some of the items that we started to look at were, we have this volunteer. Do we have a well construction or a well ID? And if we don't have a well ID, can we find it? Once we find it, is the log completed? And if it is completed, is it showing that the well is completed in the target aquifer, or is it too deep to be part of this study? We had then also looked at where these wells fell in relation to potential source areas on the surface. Yeah.
What's your definition of too deep to be included?
Well, if it was within the Dolostone, we included it. So there wasn't really a depth cutoff. It was more like a geology cutoff. We tried to look at area representation, and if there was a couple of wells in that area, we went with the more shallow well. But some well logs are actually into the Maquoketa Shale and deeper into the sandstone, but not many.
And to clarify, you didn't do any sampling and then the book would all the same thing.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
So just one question. So I don't see any that were, any of these volunteers that were tested in ag sites. Is there another, none of these were, I see landfills, I see orchards, and so there's near proximity of an agricultural operation. That was one of the options early on. I don't see that
We
there.
did include that, but no, sorry, they're not included in the breakdown. Also, these, they're not the samples within those areas. That was just a breakdown of where the volunteers fell.
Okay.
And so the purple then, to answer your question, the purple are the selected wells that we went forward with in the fall 2023 sampling event. This was about 89 wells. This was completed from September 25th through the 12th of October. And all of these wells received at least 4 analytes, and that was our emerging contaminants, which is our PFAS, specifically the PFOA and PFOS. As I'm sure you're all aware, these are your non-stick cookware, your stain resistant, anything that repels oil and water. Each of these wells will also sample for bacteria, which is total quantified coliform and E. coli. We also looked at nitrate and we looked at chloride. Yep.
In the Sturgeon Bay and Sister Bay, are either any of those municipal wells?
No. So then certain wells were further analyzed for either all 4 or a selection of the next 4 based on their proximity. So any wells that were down gradient and within 1 mile of heavy agricultural use got further screening for DACT pesticides, which is DACT is a breakdown product of a common herbicide, atrazine. Running the DACT screen is often a much more affordable way to determine if there might be impacts to your well. Any wells that were down gradient of orchards were sampled for arsenic. And then we sampled volatile organic compounds and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in more industrial land use areas. We sampled near former gas stations or current gas stations, dry cleaning facilities, landfills. So we added those analytes to those land use. So as a brief introduction to the sampling methodology, when we first got to a property, we would locate the well and add it a GPS point. We then discussed with the homeowner if their pressure tank was accessible. If it was accessible, that's where we would prefer to take our sample because it represents the closest point to the well. If the pressure tank wasn't accessible, then we would sample the outdoor spigot. We noted the dimensions and the volume of the pressure tank and began our flushing. So we wanted to make sure that we purged at least 3 pressure tank volumes of water before we collected our sample. We first began by collecting the PFAS and the VOCs, and we used a clean hands, dirty hands procedure for all of the collection. And so the person who handled the sample bottles that's all they could handle the entire time of the sampling event. And then we had a dirty hands personnel who would handle the purging, the disinfection, the moving buckets, those kind of things. And so after we did the PFAS and the VOC collection, we would flame the spigot for 10 seconds to make sure we burnt off any bacteria that might cross-contaminate the bacteria samples. We flushed additionally for another 5 minutes, and then we collected our bacteria, followed by our remaining analytes, and all samples were immediately placed on ice in coolers and shipped to the lab that day. And so we tackled groups of about 6 to 8 wells, depending on homeowners' availability, across the course of the sampling event. So when it comes to interpreting our results, we used a couple of different standards to compare our results to. The PFAS were compared to the Wisconsin Administrative Code Chapter NR 809 maximum contaminant levels. This is really for public drinking water reference, but there is a WDNR guidance that recommends using this value for private wells too for PFAS. This value is 70 parts per trillion, and the EPA have proposed a maximum contaminant level of 4. While it hasn't been ratified, just because there is a significant difference there, we wanted to use both of these just to be conservative. The remaining analytes are compared to Chapter NR 140, which is groundwater quality. There's 2 concentrations to compare your standards, or excuse me, to compare your concentrations to there. One is your enforcement standard, and this really acts as a maximum allowable concentration in groundwater. A lot of times this corresponds to the maximum allowed in drinking water. And then there's a PAL, a preventative action limit, which is a smaller percentage of the ES, and it's really used in facility design. And so these are really values that pertain to facilities that are regulated by the DNR, but it's a good reference for groundwater quality. And so if I start with our PFAS, all 89 wells were sampled for PFAS, and 6 of them had either PFOS or PFOA detections. You'll see on the table here that we have added the PFOS and the PFOA value concentrations together, and that's because the 809 MCL is the value is for both of those analytes added together, so we need to add them together before we can compare them to the MCL. And so they're significantly below the drinking water standard of 70, and only one of them exceeds the EPA's proposed MCL of 4. And I'll just mention that in the figures moving forward, that the triangles represent locations where we sampled. If they're purple, that means they were sampled and they were not detected. If they're blue, that means they were detected and they're below standards. And if they're yellow or red, they'll be an exceedance of standards. And so bacteria was sampled from all 89 wells. We had 11 coliform detections, and one of these coliform detections also had an E. coli hit. The values are quite low. We didn't have any screaming high coliform samples. And again, we had an E. coli hit on the highest value with coliform. The values are the sample locations are shown there in purple with the non-detects, and the detected samples are shown in yellow. Nitrate, all 89 wells were sampled for nitrate. There were 61 detections. 38 of these detections were below the PAL. 21 of them were above the PAL but below the ES, and only 2 of the detections exceeded the ES. So only 2 of these detections exceeded the drinking water recommendation value not to exceed of 10. And so you'll see that the 2 highest results of 10.2 and 13.8 are kind of hovering around that enforcement standard. So there's nothing extremely high here. Chloride was sampled in all 89 wells. 87 of them had detections, but the detections were quite in normal ranges, and there were no detections above the PAL. So like I said before, any wells that were in proximity to agricultural use were further sampled for the DAC screen. Out of the 80 wells that were sampled, only 3 of them had detections, and the detections were below the PAL, so nothing too alarming there. Arsenic was sampled from 61 wells. Only 15 of the 61 wells had detections. 10 of these 15 detections were below the preventative action limit. 4 of them were above the preventative action limit, but not by much. And one of them was above the ES, and it was above the ES by about 3 times. And again, in this scenario, the ES represents the maximum or the maximum recommended concentration in drinking water. VOCs were sampled from 34 of the wells. This VOC analysis looks for about 77 common volatile organic compounds. Only one of them was detected, and it was detected above the PAL. It was methylene chloride. We do tend to see this as a lab remnant. Sometimes when they're disinfecting things at the lab, it can cross-contaminate. I did talk to the lab though, and he said that he thinks that this is likely a real hit. But again, it's a single hit at 1.9 and the PAL is 0.5. 23 wells were selected for PAH analysis. This PAH analysis looks for about 16 common PAHs. Out of the 23 wells, 6 of them had 1 or more PAH detections, and only 1 of them had a concentration that was above the PAL. And again, the PAL is 0.02 and the concentration was 0.021. We collected 10 wells for aquifer characterization. And essentially this just looks at the ratio of dissolved cations and anions in water samples. And we plot them on these Piper tertiary diagrams. The cations are the bottom left and the anions are the bottom right. Wherever they plot on either 2 of these triangles is directly correlated together to plot on the upper diamond shape. You want to go next? In this case, our samples all plotted quite nicely together in the magnesium bicarbonate type aquifer, which is supportive of previous studies that have been done by the USGS on that aquifer type. And we basically run this to make sure that we are sampling the right aquifer and we're not getting any surface water intrusion that might be impacting the groundwater at that location. So once we had all our results in, which took a little longer than we expected at the labs, but we issued a notification letter to each of the wells that were sampled. The letter just thanked them for their participation and outlined their results and compared them to standards. These were issued via mail and also via email, because I know some people aren't there full time. If there was an exceedance in their well, we would issue them with WDNR published supportive documents that kind of discusses why this analyte might be in your well, what you can do to reduce your exposure, and just overall a more informational package for them. And so our next steps are the finalization of our fall 2023 sampling report. Well, then, now that we have all the data in and it's into our online EQUIS database, we will be able to look at the spatial data trends and also compare it to the historical data trends collected by UW Oshkosh. We also want to think about our spring sampling and our following year sampling. In year 2, we'll be looking at more emerging contaminants such as microplastics and pharmaceuticals. And then we'll want to identify our secondary sampling analytes, because the following years and the following sample events will be more tailored and more honing in on certain areas where we want to explore further. And then we are meeting with Dr. Ken Bradbury and Dr. John Luchak next week, actually, to get their valuable input. They're both very familiar with Door County, and hopefully it'll help add some value to this project.
Question, will you be sampling the same wells or?
Some may be the same. Yeah, some may not.
Thank you. Questions? Bud?
Is that traced back to the spray known as a Bordeaux mixture with lime, copper sulfate, and lead arsenate in it?
The
arsenic itself?
Are you asking, is that why we're sampling it or?
Just, is it able to be traced back to that?
I'm not
you
sure.
think-
We might have, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to get input from others.
Yeah, that's what we used for insecticide when
Okay.
I was a kid. The lead arsenate in with lime and copper sulfate. It was known as the Bordeaux mixture back in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
Still had a big, it's sitting in the barn 30 years ago.
Right.
Great question. And the reason why Cheryl included arsenic was exactly the reason you're describing. But there's also natural sources of arsenic in the dolomite as well. And so that one hit that Cheryl mentioned is something we're evaluating further. Could it be anthropogenic, meaning man-made, or could it be a natural source as well?
Todd, I'm sorry.
So obviously, a lot of work went into this and I really thank you for the report, but from a general synopsis perspective, we got some arsenic here, we've got some things that was just better or worse than we expected, or is there a narrative to the results of these countywide? Should our hair be on fire somewhere? The ones that wouldn't have my hair on fire, but is there problematic issues that are immediately needing to be addressed? And I mean, there's folks like Bob and Alexis and Vinny that are, and Greg back there that maybe know this a whole lot better than the rest of us, but put this in layman's terms.
So.
Excuse me, real quickly, is there any area, it's kind of the same kind of question Todd had, that's why I'm interrupting. Any particular areas in the county that are more concerned than other areas of the county, or, from these maps, it was hard for me to.
Yeah, so as of right now, we're pleasantly surprised with the data, particularly the PFAS and the nitrates. I mean, a lot of Wisconsin have nitrates that are much higher, just due to the practices that we do in the state. But yeah, the PFAS were 6 out of 89 wells was, and at the low values that they were. I know the DNR just did a study for public and private wells that were, across statewide. And obviously they have a larger sampling pool, but their percentages were higher. The wells were shallower, but at this point, nothing is screaming out at us. Obviously we have an arsenic hit that's 3 times the value. We'll want to look at that area a little bit more. And then to answer your question, the first, and you can add up to this, but the first year of sampling, we didn't really go out with specific areas in mind. It was meant to just be a broad scope. And then hopefully when we dive into the data a little bit more, we'll start to look at, maybe we want to look at here a little bit more and there a little bit more. But we didn't go into the project with that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the consideration for future sampling based on time of year? Springtime, we get the melt, the groundwater rises, things are maybe more diluted, or maybe they're being washed out of the, I always wonder, is it better to sample in spring when the water's high and things might be flowing, or is it better to sample later in the year when we tend to have, when the water table drops and things tend to be less mobile, maybe? What's the thinking about timing of the year?
Yeah, so we actually, this current sampling event, we sampled at a very dry, during a very dry spell. And so we want to capture the spring just to compare our results. Obviously with more melt, the more infiltration that happens from the surface. And so we expect perhaps more to look at with our spring 2024 sampling results. But yeah, I think moving forward, we may do a spring and then a late summer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then I can speak, I was one of the 89. I can speak to the hit on the methylene chloride because I'm right across the street from a former leaky underground storage tank lust site. And it is a auto fix-it place, and methylene chloride, as I understand it, is a serious component in paint stripper, paint thinner kind of thing, or paint removal. So I'm assuming that's accurate. So my hit is what I hope you could address, and it's a little selfish on my part, but I think it also can be maybe helpful. Elucidate a little bit the difference between the PAL and the ES. So the way it's listed for this one in particular, it's listed as 0.5 is that PAL and the 5 is the ES, and I'm at 1.9. So you said the ES is more for like a public water source where they would have to do something? Is that kind of what it? or-
No, so the chapter 809 maximum contaminant levels are used for public water systems.
Okay.
The ES and the PAL are really the ES is the important one, essentially. So the ES is the maximum allowable concentration in groundwater before action must be taken at Wisconsin regulated facilities.
Okay.
And it also acts as a cleanup standard, but it also translates for methylene chloride to the maximum allowable concentration in drinking water for public water systems too. So it's the same number. So the not to exceed value is actually 5. The PAL is what we use for groundwater sites. We obviously work with a lot of Wisconsin regulated facilities. The PAL is actually more so used for facility design. So when someone's designing their agricultural practice or their manure storage, they want to avoid reaching those concentrations. But if they reach them, they're not really an enforceable standard. So it's only the ES that action must be taken if it's exceeded.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and Bob, thanks for participating in the study. And maybe if you're so kind, we might want to include your well next time around.
Absolutely. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up on Todd and Jeff's question about general trends on groundwater quality for that county. We were, as Cheryl mentioned, pleasantly surprised with the groundwater quality. And I think it has a lot to do with the practices that the county conservation department has implemented over the years in preventing releases to the subsurface, and the knowledge that's been promoted by the county itself in preventing releases and the importance of maintaining really high water quality. So I think that goes in hand. And the other thing I wanted to mention that Cheryl mentioned about the nitrate and bacteria, our results are very similar to what UW Oshkosh has found. The difference in our approach was that we actually did the sampling. And we collected the samples mostly because we were analyzing for a broad suite. UW Oshkosh sent the sample containers out to the homeowners for their sampling. So it just shows that there's collaboration between the two different approaches with what was found.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 quick questions. Number one is just from a data collection standpoint, how do we make sure we're synergistic with all the other data we're collecting, whether it's UW, Oshkosh, Stevens Point, this effort, so that we can get a holistic view? That's my first item. Number 2 is relative to the UW Oshkosh test, what was presented at the LCC meeting this previous month showed I call it a concerning trend in nitrates, not necessarily associated with agricultural areas. And is that something that when you look at your nitrate results and what has been emerging over when you look at the 4-year trend of the UW Oshkosh results, something that you're going to look at down the road? Because I think that's something we need to keep an eye on. And then the last quick question is, in the areas where you did the additional tests, like most notably agriculture areas, why I didn't see phosphates in that list, and why wasn't that also tested? Thank you.
To answer your last question first, that is for next year. So we will, if there was any wells that had a DACT hit, we would test them for phosphates. To answer your first question, and I'm sorry if I'm forgetting something, but we've had correspondence with someone, a lab manager, I think, at UW Oshkosh, who we've discussed what analysis they ran for these results. So we're making sure that we're matching the laboratory methodology. But of course, like Jim said, there's homeowners that are collecting these samples, so there might be some discrepancy. I mean, at one house, a gentleman asked me to collect his UW Oshkosh while I was in the basement, and he rolled the bacteria bottle across his basement floor, and you can't have anything touch those bottles. They're very susceptible to contamination. So I told him, and I informed him that we shouldn't, but you don't know how many homeowners are setting them, and so we can correlate the data as best as possible. And then what was your second question?
Nitrate trends.
Nitrate trends, yes. So we've got 4 of the 7 data sets from UW Oshkosh. And so we're waiting to have it all in our system before we start really honing in on those trends, but that's certainly something that will be part of the study.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. Any consideration to sampling springs? You know, obviously you'd have to work with Greg but I'm just curious, like, you know, when the groundwater is bubbling out of the ground right there, I'm wondering if there's any thought about sampling springs as part of this, or will it always just be wells? Okay. Just curious, thanks.
Just a quick comment. As I understand it, then you had a dedicated group of individuals that did this work. It was not any homeowners that did the work.
Correct.
That's a point that I really appreciate. I've watched these efforts by homeowners and what they think is a very minor, shouldn't be a mistake, rolling across the concrete, putting their thumb over the top of the lid in the wrong way. That makes me feel more comfortable about the numbers I'm seeing coming from your entity as opposed to the Oshkosh style entities, because I've watched people try to do this, plumbers try to do this. And sometimes those samples don't look as clean as they should. Thank you.
Yeah, in addition to that, there's a particularly the nitrates, there's a holding time requirement too. So you heard Cheryl say that when she collected those samples that day, they were delivered to the lab that night. So
Sometimes it is that simple.
Yeah,
yeah. Wait 3 more days to post it, you know, well, that's too late in many cases.
Yes, early on you mentioned wells having ID numbers. Are those related to having been tested before, public facilities? I know this is supposed to be private wells, but or well drillers information, what?
So each private home should have a well ID. Unfortunately, sometimes I don't know when that was implemented with the well construction reports, but often very old homes or old wells it's been lost. Only I don't know when they DNR kind of gathered everything together and put it on the online portal, but there might be older records that were lost. I think we had a number that didn't have a well ID. Not only that, but certain well construction logs, they were done before GPS. And so people were doing the sections. And so when you go online, they're plotted in the center of those sections instead of at the actual home. And then also address changes. So certain roads have been renamed. And so that log has kind of been lost because it was named something previously. And so the majority of the time you can find the well ID, but some you can. And a lot of times it's stuck inside the cap of the well, which, you know, no one opens. So sometimes it's on the pressure tank. Just depends on the well driller.
Mm-hmm. Another question. I guess it was mentioned how you maybe compared your numbers with the test done at Oshkosh. I think Oshkosh was the school doing the testing for Kewaunee County. Have you looked at any comparisons of, say, the Southern Door counties, towns next to Kewaunee, and what comparison there might be?
We have not at this time.
And if you do go to Kewaunee County's website right now, under documents and files, I believe they do have the most current study up online right now in a PDF.
Yeah, I viewed those this morning.
Okay.
But we haven't done enough of a testing, say the southernmost tier of counties in Door. Or we've been hearing testimony of how much.
Sure.
more
I mean,
southern-
we've
southern
got
Door.
several tests that were down there, and we can look at some of the tests that UW Oshkosh did on our website and compare them. But comparing Kewaunee to Door, we haven't done that kind of.
Mhm. For those of us from Southern Door, we're always hearing numbers in regard to the Kewaunee County testing. And the village of Casco is really a problem with their nitrates, especially in their new wells that they're trying to drill.
Anybody else? No other questions? Thank you very, very much. Very informative. Appreciate it. All right, new business. None oral committee reports. Any oral committee reports? Review of committee minutes. Review of vouchers, claims, and bills. The next county board meeting is scheduled for February 27th at 10 a.m. Any comments from you? Yep. A motion to adjourn would be in order. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.